Under the shadow of Colorado's jagged peaks, Emily Anderson poured her soul into saving her family's crumbling hotel, only to watch her own brother, Ethan, snatch it away with a smug grin. What would you do if every sacrifice you made was erased by the one person you trusted most? A secret buried in stolen cash and a storm that shattered her dreams would soon reveal the truth. But at what cost? Hit that subscribe button and join us to uncover this roller coaster of betrayal and triumph. Let's get to 1,000 subscribers together. Under the shadow of Colorado's jagged peaks, Emily Anderson poured her soul into saving her family's crumbling hotel, only to watch her own brother, Ethan, snatch it away with a smug grin. What would you do if every sacrifice you made was erased by the one person you trusted most? A secret buried in stolen cash and a storm that shattered her dreams would soon reveal the truth. But at what cost? Hit that subscribe button and join us to uncover this roller coaster of betrayal and triumph. Let's get to 1,000 subscribers together. The air in the newly renovated lobby of Mountain Pine Lodge was crisp with the scent of pine and polish, a testament to 8 months of relentless work. Emily Anderson stood there, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. What do you mean Ethan's going to be CEO? I'm the one who saved this place. The words echoed off the sleek, mountain-inspired decor, wood-paneled walls, stone accents, and locally sourced artwork she'd handpicked to breathe life back into this dying relic. At 52, Emily had given up everything. Her high-flying career in Chicago, her cozy condo with a view of Lake Michigan, her entire savings to answer her father's desperate call. Now, it felt like a slap across her weathered face. Her mother, Linda Anderson, waved a dismissive hand, her manicured nails glinting under the chandelier's soft glow. Emily, honey, Ethan has a natural leadership ability. You're too detail-oriented, always fussing over spreadsheets and carpet swatches. The condescension dripped from her voice, as if Emily's meticulous care was a flaw, rather than the backbone of their revival. Her father, James Anderson, sat silently in his worn armchair by the reception desk, staring at the floor as if it held the answers to this unfolding disaster. Emily's chest tightened, a mix of fury and disbelief swelling inside her. Then Ethan strolled in, hands stuffed in his pockets, his lanky frame slouched with the casual arrogance she'd known since they were kids. 3 years younger, he'd always been the golden child. Despite dropping out of college, bouncing between half-baked jobs, and leaving a trail of excuses in his wake. "Hey, sis, don't take it personally," he said, flashing that smug grin that made her want to scream. "Someone's got to handle the day-to-day grind while I focus on the bigger picture." The bigger picture? Emily had turned a 2-star nightmare into the talk of Colorado, doubling bookings, pulling them out of the red, while Ethan had been off networking in Denver dive bars. 8 months ago, James had called her in tears. "We're weeks from losing it all, Em," he'd choked out over the crackling line. Mountain Pine Lodge, the family legacy built by her grandfather, William "Bill" Anderson, in 1971, was hemorrhaging money. Dated decor, no online presence, reviews so brutal they'd made Emily cringe. Stuck in the past, not worth the price. She hadn't hesitated. She resigned from her role as regional director for a major hotel chain, sold her condo, and drove 1,000 miles back to Colorado. Day and night, she'd hunched over spreadsheets, negotiated with suppliers, trained a ragtag staff, and used every industry connection to land features in travel magazines. The transformation was nothing short of a miracle. New carpets, a revamped reservation system, a lobby that felt like a warm embrace rather than a time capsule. For the first time in years, they'd turned a profit. Emily's mind flashed back to her childhood in these halls. While other kids played tag, she'd shadowed Bill, wiping down check-in counters with a rag bigger than her hands, listening to his gravelly voice spin dreams of a thriving lodge. "This place is our heart, Em," he'd say, his calloused fingers ruffling her hair. Ethan, meanwhile, had spent his summers chasing girls and dodging chores. "He's just creative," Linda would coo, as if his aimlessness was a virtue. Emily had gone to college, earned a degree in hospitality management, and climbed the ladder in Chicago. Every milestone met with tepid nods from her parents. That's nice, dear. When are you coming home? It was never enough. Now, standing in the lobby she'd resurrected, Emily watched her triumph slip through her fingers. Tonight's staff meeting was supposed to be her moment, presenting record-breaking quarterly results, proving her worth. Instead, Linda and James announced Ethan's promotion with forced smiles, as if it were a logical reward for his occasional dinner table suggestions. The staff, loyal faces like Sarah Mitchell, the head housekeeper who'd been there 20 years, shifted uncomfortably. Sarah's gray eyes locked with Emily's, a silent acknowledgement of the truth everyone knew. Emily was the one who dragged this place from the brink. Why him? Emily demanded, her voice trembling. I'm the only one with real experience. 20 years in the industry. Ethan can't even hold a job. Linda sighed, patting her hand like she was soothing a tantrum. He needs this, Emily. You've always been so capable. You don't need a title to shine. James finally looked up, his weathered face etched with guilt, but he said nothing. Ethan smirked, leaning against the counter. Relax, sis. I've got ideas to take us to the next level. Emily's hands clenched into fists. Ideas? The last idea Ethan had was painting the lodge neon green, a drunken pitch he'd laughed off at a family dinner. She'd spent months undoing decades of neglect, every penny from her savings calculated to maximize return, every sleepless night fueled by the hope they'd finally see her. But they didn't. They saw Ethan, their reckless, charming boy, and handed him her legacy on a silver platter. As the staff dispersed, whispering among themselves, Emily stood frozen. Sarah lingered, her apron wrinkled from a long shift. You deserved better than this, she murmured, her voice low. Emily nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She walked out into the biting Colorado night, the stars sharp against the black sky, and climbed into her car. The engine hummed as she gripped the wheel, her mind racing. They don't need me, she whispered to the empty passenger seat. They never did. But then a question flickered in the dark. What if I don't need them either? She didn't know it yet, but that spark, born of betrayal and exhaustion, would soon ignite something unstoppable. The fight was just beginning. The Mountain Pine Lodge hummed with a fragile energy in the weeks after Ethan Anderson took the reins, but Emily Anderson could feel the cracks forming beneath the polished surface she'd fought so hard to rebuild. At 52, she'd seen enough failing hotels to recognize the signs. Staff morale dipping, guest complaints trickling in, a slow bleed that could kill a place before anyone noticed. She lingered in the shadows of the lobby she'd transformed, watching Ethan strut around like he owned it, his lanky frame casting a shadow over her legacy. 3 weeks into his leadership, the unraveling began, and Emily's fury ignited into something sharper, something dangerous. It started small, but cut deep. Ethan slashed the Continental breakfast service, one of their highest-rated amenities, claiming it would save costs. Emily stormed into his makeshift office, a cluttered corner of the back room littered with empty coffee cups and crumpled napkins. Ethan, that breakfast is why our guests keep coming back, she snapped, slapping a stack of guest satisfaction reports on his desk. The numbers glared up at him. 90% of reviews praised the fresh pastries and mountain views over coffee. He barely glanced at them, leaning back in his chair with that infuriating smirk. Numbers aren't everything, sis. We need bold moves, not nickel and dime stuff. Bold moves? She'd spent months negotiating with local bakers to source those pastries affordably, turning a loss leader into a profit driver. Now, he'd undone it with a shrug. Then came the real blow. Emily walked into the housekeeping office one morning to find Maria Lopez, a 15-year veteran with hands as steady as the Rockies, packing her things. Her dark eyes were red-rimmed, her apron folded neatly on the table. He fired me, Miss Emily, Maria said, her voice trembling. Said I wasn't flexible with his new schedule. Was a chaotic mess. Shifts slashed and rearranged so badly that peak checkout hours left them dangerously understaffed. Emily's heart sank, Maria wasn't just an employee, she was family. The one who'd taught Emily how to fold fitted sheets when she was barely tall enough to reach the beds. "I'll fix this," Emily promised, gripping Maria's shoulder. She marched back to Ethan, who waved her off mid-sentence. "She's too old school, Em. We need fresh blood." Fresh blood? Maria's loyalty had kept this place afloat when Ethan was off chasing his latest pipe dream. That night, Emily sat at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop casting harsh lines across her face. She scrolled through the lodge's online reviews, each new one a dagger. "Service is slipping. What happened to this gem?" Her hands shook as she typed an email to James and Linda, pleading for them to see reason. "Ethan's tanking everything I built," she wrote. "We can't let this go on." The reply came at dawn, curt and cold from Linda. "Give him time, Emily. He's finding his footing." James didn't even bother to respond. She slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing in her empty apartment. Time? She'd given them 8 months of her life. Every penny, every sleepless night. And they still chose him. But the real bombshell landed the next day. An email pinged into her inbox from an anonymous sender. The subject line, blank. Inside were scanned receipts, thousands of dollars siphoned from the lodge's renovation budget, funneled into vague consulting fees and bar tabs in Denver. A note followed, "Check the dates. This was before you came back. Tom." Thomas Tom Carter, the old accountant who'd quit last year, had slipped her the truth. Emily's breath caught as she cross-referenced the timestamps. Months before James's tearful call. Back when Ethan was supposedly networking, he hadn't just been partying, he'd been stealing. Bleeding the lodge dry while she was still in Chicago, oblivious. The betrayal wasn't new, it was old, festering, and her parents had known. She drove to the lodge at sunrise, the receipts clutched in her hand, and confronted James and Linda in the empty dining room. "Did you know about this?" she demanded, thrusting the papers at them. James stared at his coffee mug, the steam curling up like a ghost, his silence louder than any confession. Linda sighed, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan made mistakes, Emily. He's young. Don't make this bigger than it needs to be." Young. He was 49, not some wayward teen. "Mistakes?" Emily's voice rose, cracking. "He stole from us, from Grandpa Bill's legacy." "And you covered for him?" Linda reached for her hand, but Emily yanked it back. "We couldn't lose him, too," Linda whispered. "You were always so strong. We knew you'd manage." The words hit like a punch. They hadn't called her back to save the lodge. They'd called her to clean up Ethan's mess, to prop him up while he played king. Her mind spun, torn between exposing him, maybe even calling the cops, and the gnawing guilt of tearing her family apart. She stumbled out into the parking lot, the cold biting at her cheeks, and slid into her car. The engine roared to life, but she didn't know where to go. Home felt like a cage now, the lodge a graveyard of her dreams. Then, as she pulled onto the highway, a faded sign caught her eye. "For sale, Riverside Lodge." The old competitor, once a rival to Mountain Pine, sat crumbling near the ski slopes, its potential whispering through the cracked paint and sagging roof. Emily slowed, her heart pounding. Better views, more space, a chance to start over. She pulled into the deserted lot, staring at the sign as the sun crested the peaks, bathing the ruin in gold. Her phone buzzed. Linda again, probably with more excuses, but Emily silenced it. She dialed her realtor instead, voice steady despite the storm inside. "I want to see it tomorrow." As she hung up, a whisper escaped her lips. "If they don't need me, I'll build something they can't ignore." The receipts burned a hole in her pocket, a secret she hadn't decided how to wield. Was this the end of her loyalty, or the beginning of her revenge? Emily Anderson stood in the skeletal frame of Riverside Lodge, her boots crunching on frost-covered gravel as she traced the outline of her new dream. The air was sharp with the promise of snow, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones and made you feel alive, or desperate. At 52, she'd bet everything on this crumbling relic, her savings, a hefty bank loan, even her pride. naming it the Summit as a defiant middle finger to the family who'd discarded her. Mountain Pine Lodge was Ethan's now. A sinking ship she'd refused to captain, but the sting of betrayal still lingered like a bruise she couldn't stop pressing. This place, with its cracked windows and sagging beams, was her chance to rise above it all, if she could survive what came next. The first blow came from Ethan, subtle but vicious. Word spread fast in their small Colorado town. Rumors that Emily had abandoned her family out of spite, that she was a bitter sister hell-bent on revenge. Local suppliers, folks she'd known since childhood, started dodging her calls. "Sorry, Em," one muttered over the phone, his voice thick with guilt. "Linda's been talking, says it's disloyal to work with you." Emily's jaw clenched as she hung up, picturing her mother's tight-lipped smile twisting the truth. She pivoted to Denver vendors instead, driving up costs and eating into her razor-thin budget. Every delivery truck that rolled in felt like a small victory, but the whispers gnawed at her. Was she the villain here, or were they? She threw herself into the Summit like it was her last stand. Contractors hammered through the dawn, turning the lodge's weathered husk into something sleek and modern. Floor-to-ceiling windows for ski slope views, a spa that promised luxury, eco-friendly touches she dreamed of for Mountain Pine but never got past Linda's veto. Sarah Mitchell, the head housekeeper, who'd followed her from the old lodge, became her rock. "You're building something real here," Sarah said one night, her gray eyes steady as they sorted linens. Emily nodded, but the weight of the bank loan pressed on her chest. $500,000, with payments looming like a guillotine. Failure wasn't an option. Then the sky turned against her. A week before the grand opening, a freak blizzard roared down from the Rockies, the kind of storm that locals called a widowmaker. Emily woke to a frantic call from her contractor. "The spa roof's gone, collapsed under the snow." She raced to the site, her truck skidding on ice, and found chaos. Jagged beams jutting from a pile of rubble, workers huddled against the wind, the spa she'd poured her heart into reduced to a frozen graveyard. She sank to her knees in the snow, tears freezing on her cheeks as the wind howled. "I can't lose this too," she whispered, the words swallowed by the storm. The bank's deadline loomed. Open on time, or they'd pull the loan and take everything. Sarah found her there, her apron dusted with snow, and gripped her hand. "We'll fix it, Emily. I believe in you." The words cracked something open inside her, a flicker of hope amid the despair. She rallied the team. Maria Lopez, back after Ethan's betrayal, wielded a shovel alongside the rest. They worked 72 hours straight, no sleep, fueled by coffee and sheer will. Emily bartered with a Denver supplier for emergency materials, promising future contracts she couldn't guarantee. The crew rebuilt the spa in a blur of sawdust and sweat, their breath fogging in the frigid air. When the last beam locked into place 48 hours before the deadline, Emily collapsed against a wall, her hands raw and bleeding. "We did it," she rasped, and Sarah hugged her tight, tears in her eyes. But the storm left scars deeper than the rubble. That night, as Emily nursed a mug of tea in her cramped trailer office, a letter slipped under the door. No stamp, just her name in Linda's elegant scrawl. She hesitated, the receipts of Ethan's theft still burning a hole in her desk drawer, then tore it open. "Emily," it read, "I once dreamed of being a doctor, but I gave it up to keep Mountain Pine alive for us, for you and Ethan. I see myself in you, and I'm sorry I never said it before." The words hit like a punch, stirring memories of Linda stitching curtains late into the night, her dreams traded for duty. Emily's hands trembled as she read on. "Please don't hate us." She stared at the page, then ripped it in half, the pieces fluttering to the floor like broken promises. Hate? She didn't hate them. She just couldn't carry their weight anymore. But those fragments stayed with her, a ghost she couldn't shake. The grand opening loomed, and the summit rose from the ashes, sleek, inviting, buzzing with last-minute prep. Guests arrived in droves, their chatter filling the lobby with life, their 5-star bookings a lifeline against the bank's threats. Emily stood by the new spa, its glass walls gleaming, and allowed herself a moment of pride. She'd done this. Without James's silence, without Linda's excuses, without Ethan's chaos. But as she watched the first skiers check in, a shadow crept into her mind. Ethan wouldn't let this go unchallenged. He'd lost too much face, and she knew her brother, he'd strike back. Hard. She stepped outside, the cold biting her cheeks, and looked toward Mountain Pine Lodge in the distance, its lights dim against the night. "You wanted me gone," she murmured. "Now watch what I become." The storm had tested her, but it hadn't broken her. Not yet. The real fight was coming, and she could feel it in her bones. The summit stood like a beacon against the Colorado skyline, its glass walls catching the winter sun as guests streamed through the lobby, their laughter a stark contrast to the storm that had nearly buried it. Emily Anderson moved among them, her smile practiced, but her eyes sharp, scanning for cracks in the dream she'd clawed back from ruin. At 52, she'd turned Riverside Lodge into a masterpiece. Pico-friendly suites, a spa that rivaled the best in Aspen, bookings that had the bank off her back for now. But the victory felt fragile. A house of cards waiting for the next gust. She'd built this without her family, without James's guilt, Linda's excuses, Ethan's chaos. But the shadow of Mountain Pine Lodge loomed in the distance, a reminder of what she'd left behind and what still hunted her. Ethan struck first, his revenge as petty as it was ruthless. A week after the grand opening, guests at the summit woke to shivering rooms, their breath fogging in the January chill. Emily raced to the basement, her boots echoing on the concrete, and found the heating system in chaos. Valves torn loose, pipes leaking, a slow, deliberate sabotage. She called in Jake Reynolds, the new maintenance guy she'd hired on a whim, and his shifty eyes gave him away before his mouth did. "Ethan paid me," he muttered, avoiding her glare. $5,000 to mess with the heat. Said you'd ruined him and he wanted you to feel it." $5,000? Mountain Pine was bleeding out under Ethan's reign. Where had he gotten that kind of cash? The answer gnawed at her. Those receipts, the ones Tom had sent, hinted at deeper debts, darker corners she hadn't dared to probe. Emily fired Jake on the spot, her voice cold as the pipes he'd wrecked. "Get out before I call the cops." He slunk away, but the damage was done. Guest reviews tanked overnight, dropping the summit from a pristine 5 stars to a shaky 4.2. She spent days soothing angry patrons, comping rooms, and begging the repair crew to work overtime, her savings dwindling with every fix. Sarah Mitchell found her in the office late one night, hunched over a calculator, her hands trembling. "He won't stop, Sarah," Emily whispered. "He'll burn this place down before he lets me win." Sarah's jaw tightened, her voice low. "He took my boy from me, worked him to death at Mountain Pine. Don't let him take this too." Emily froze. Sarah's son, a quiet kid who died of exhaustion under Ethan's reckless schedules, was a wound she'd never spoken of until now. The stakes weren't just personal anymore, they were blood deep. Then came the knock that shattered her fragile calm. James and Linda stood in her doorway, their faces drawn and pale, the weight of defeat clinging to them like damp snow. "Mountain Pine's done," James said, his voice a rasp. "Bank's calling the loan. Ethan borrowed more, tens of thousands, to save it, but he blew it on parties, investors who never showed." Linda's eyes brimmed with tears, her hands twisting a scarf. "We're losing everything, Emily. You're our only hope. Come back. Teach him how to fix this." Emily stared, her mind reeling. Teach him? The man who'd stolen from them, sabotaged her, and now dragged their legacy to the edge of oblivion? James sank into a chair, his shoulders slumped. "Your Grandpa Bill died for that lodge, worked himself into the ground in 71. Heart gave out right there in the lobby. Don't let his dream die too." The revelation hit Emily like a freight train. She'd known Bill was gone too soon, but not like that. Not a sacrifice etched into the lodge's bones. Linda stepped closer, her voice breaking. "We're family, Em. You can't let us fall." Emily's throat tightened, memories flooding back. Bill's gravelly laugh as he taught her to count change. His pride when she'd balanced her first ledger at 12. Mountain Pine wasn't just a building, it was him, and they were asking her to save it again. But Sarah's words echoed louder. Don't let him take this too. Emily thought of her team. Maria Lopez, back after Ethan's cruelty, her hands steady as she scrubbed floors. Sarah, who'd rebuilt the spa with her. The staff who'd chosen her over him. The summit was her family now, forged in sweat and trust, not blood and guilt. She looked at James and Linda, their desperation a mirror of the call that had pulled her from Chicago. I offered to help a year ago, she said, her voice steady but raw. You chose Ethan. Knew he wasn't ready, knew he'd stolen, and you let him run it into the ground. Why should I give up what I've built to fix his mess again? Linda opened her mouth, but Emily cut her off. No, I'm done being your safety net. James flinched, his eyes glistening, but he nodded. A small, broken gesture. Linda's tears fell, silent and accusing, as they turned to leave. Emily shut the door behind them, her chest heaving. She slid into her chair, staring at the receipts on her desk. Proof of Ethan's theft. A weapon she could still use. Call the cops, sink him for good, or let him drown in his own ruin. The choice clawed at her, a war between justice and the girl who'd once loved her little brother. She drove to Mountain Pine that night, the lodge's silhouette a ghost against the moon. Its sign hung crooked, windows dark, a shell of the place Bill had dreamed of. She sat in her truck, tears streaking her face as she remembered him. His rough hands, his quiet faith in her. I tried, Grandpa, she whispered. I tried so hard. But as she pulled away, the summit glowed on the horizon, a light she'd made herself. Ethan's sabotage, her parents' pleas. They were chains she could break, but at what cost? She didn't know yet, and the uncertainty burned. Emily Anderson stood in the sterile glow of the ICU, the beep of machines a cruel rhythm against the silence. James Anderson lay frail on the bed, his weathered hands limp, tubes snaking from his arms like lifelines to a sinking ship. Hours ago, he'd collapsed, a sudden stroke brought on by the stress of losing Mountain Pine Lodge. And now, Linda's voice trembled through the phone. He needs you, Em. Come quick. Emily had driven through the night, the Colorado roads a blur of snow and regret, arriving just as dawn broke over the hospital. At 52, she'd faced storms and sabotage, but this frail shell of her father cut deeper than anything Ethan could throw at her. Linda hovered by the bed, her eyes red and hollow. It's the lodge, she whispered, clutching James's hand. The bank's taking it tomorrow. He couldn't take it. Emily's throat tightened as James stirred, his voice a rasp. Em, I was wrong. Chose Ethan. Should have been you. Forgive me. His words cracked her open, a flood of memories rushing in. His quiet pride when she'd begged her to save Mountain Pine a year ago. She gripped his hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. I forgive you, Dad, she said, her voice breaking. But I can't go back. I can't fix it again. His eyes fluttered shut, a single tear escaping, and she felt the weight of that choice settle like stone. She left the hospital as the sun climbed higher, her heart a battlefield of grief and resolve. The summit awaited, her refuge, her rebellion, and tonight was the Colorado Luxury Hotels Awards, where it was nominated for Boutique Hotel of the Year. She drove back, the road winding past Mountain Pine's dim silhouette, its fate sealed by Ethan's recklessness. The receipts of his theft sat heavy in her glove box, a ticking bomb she hadn't detonated. Call the cops, end him, or let him sink? She didn't have an answer, not yet. The ballroom buzzed with industry giants, their chatter a hum beneath the chandeliers as Emily stood with her team. Sarah Mitchell, Maria Lopez, faces she'd fought for. The summit gleamed in their eyes, a testament to what they'd built from rubble. The announcer's voice cut through. Boutique Hotel of the Year, the summit! The room erupted, applause crashing like waves, but before Emily could step forward, a slurred shout shattered the moment. Ethan stumbled onto the stage, reeking of whiskey, his suit rumpled. She doesn't deserve it, he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger. She destroyed us. Our family, our lodge. She's a traitor. The crowd froze, a sea of wide eyes and hushed gasps. Emily's pulse roared as she climbed the steps, facing him. Her brother, her saboteur, her ghost. You're wrong, Ethan. she said, her voice steady, loud enough for every ear. I didn't destroy our family. I built a new one. With these people, with trust you never earned. This isn't revenge. It's proof I'm enough. She pushed past him, his arm flailing as security dragged him off, his curses fading into the din. The audience surged to their feet, clapping, but Emily caught Linda in the back, her face a mask of tears and silence, turning away. She took the award, its weight cold in her hands, and spoke, "Thank you to my team, Sarah, Maria, everyone who believed in me, and to Mountain Pine Lodge where I learned to love this work. Sometimes you have to let go to rise." The words hung heavy, a subtle dig and a quiet truth. Backstage, a Travel Rockies editor cornered her, eyes gleaming. "We're naming the summit best boutique in the Rockies, and we're running a piece on failing legacies." Mountain Pine's the headline. Emily nodded, her smile tight. The contrast would sting. Her triumph, their ruin. But it wasn't her doing, it was theirs. Days later, Mountain Pine sold at auction, a husk of Bill's dream. Emily didn't attend, but she sent a consultant, anonymously, to help James and Linda salvage a fraction of the wreckage, a nod to the grandfather she'd loved. Ethan vanished, rumors swirling he'd fled town, chased by debts to shadowy lenders. Some whispered he'd borrowed from the mob. Truth or excuse, no one knew. Emily didn't chase the answer. His bitterness was his burden now. One morning, Sarah brought her a weathered wooden box found in the summit's attic. Inside was Bill Anderson's journal, its pages yellowed but alive. "I wanted my daughter, Linda, to take this place," he wrote. "She said no, said the world wouldn't let a woman lead then. I hope one day a woman in this family makes it great." Emily's breath caught, tears streaming as she traced his scrawl. Bill's dream hadn't died with Mountain Pine. It lived in her, in the summit, a legacy reborn through the granddaughter he believed in. She stood in the lobby that evening, sunlight pouring through the windows, casting gold over the modern decor she'd designed. Guests laughed, planning ski runs. Her staff moved with quiet pride. Sarah with a tray, Maria with a smile. Emily raised a glass with them, her voice soft. "We didn't just survive, we thrived." The aroma of fresh coffee mingled with mountain air, a scene she'd once dreamed for Mountain Pine, now real here. But as she sipped, a question lingered. Had she done enough for them? For James, for Linda, for Bill's memory? She'd forgiven but not returned. She'd helped, but from afar. Peace settled over her, fragile but hers.